the volume a little bit.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for being with us today. I'm Julius, part of AI Entrepreneurs at Berkeley, who are co-organizing this event. So first of all, a bit about who's here, who's at the panel, a bit about the agenda, and then we can get started with the chat. Noise is a bit annoying. Let's see if we can fix that. Otherwise, I'll turn it off. Okay. Yeah, again, thanks. We are here for the topic of generative AI and VC, the future of the industry. Brought to you by AI Entrepreneurs at Berkeley, the only and first student club that helps AI startups, I see all our members here, to build their startup and bring their idea to life. Then also brought to you by Unusual Ventures, a fantastic VC firm that we're partnering with. More about you guys later. As well as Entrepreneurs at Berkeley, the probably most renowned club for entrepreneurship on campus here, and very thankfully sponsored by the Berkeley Haas Entrepreneurship Program. So thank you, Adiba, for making this possible. It would be fantastic if you could quickly sign in here, so we can kind of follow up with a link of the recording and make sure, you all just quickly use your phone to put in your email. And we also want to know kind of how you heard about the events and our outreach. In terms of agenda, we're firstly going to have a fireside chat here with Santja Hegde and Professor Gaspar Vegas. We're going to introduce them in a second, and then afterwards a moderated Q&A session by entrepreneurs at Berkeley. And afterwards you can of course meet our fantastic guest speakers here. In the meantime, enjoy the pizza and have some food.
Awesome, so I'm going to take a moment to say the land acknowledgement. So we recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with our values of community, inclusion, and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native people. As members of the Berkeley community, it is vitally important that we not only recognize the history of the land on which we stand, but also we recognize that the Muwekma Ohlone people are still alive and flourishing members of the Berkeley and broader Bay Area community today.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And we'd like to quickly introduce ourselves. My name is Julius. I'm the co-founder of AI Entrepreneurs at Berkeley. I'm a founder myself to work everywhere from tech startups to banking consulting, doing machine learning research here now at UC Berkeley. And very stoked to have you all here. To the people arriving just now, we have some spare seats here in the middle. Just feel free to kind of jump in there wherever you can find space. And I'll pass it on to Dhruv next to me.
Yeah, thank you, Julius. A bit about me, I'm a student here as well. I'm studying electrical engineering and computer science. I'm also a founder myself. I'm working in the AI and machine learning space, specifically as is the hot topic today in generative AI. Besides that, I'm a researcher here. I'm working in parallel computing and signal processing. And I'm also one of the founders, working very closely with Julius, of AI Entrepreneurs Berkeley. Very thankful for that. And I'll pass it off to Savina.
Hi everyone, my name is Savina Nanda. I'm a current student here at Berkeley. I'm studying data science, super passionate about social equity and entrepreneurship. I am one of the co-presidents for Entrepreneurs at Berkeley, a Haas-sponsored organization here on campus, as well as the director of DEI for the Haas Business School Association. Super excited to see so many faces here today, and excited to kick off this event.
And now the people we are all here for. It is with my greatest pleasure, to welcome Santja Hegde and Professor Gaspar Vegas. Please give it up for them. Thank you so much for being here with us. So Santja, I think, and Professor Vegas, I'll hand it right over to you, but I just want to say I've been very thankful that you're organizing this with us. Santja is a very experienced investor in the AI SaaS space, working for Unusual Ventures now. Professor Gaspar Vegas, maybe some of you know him working in the NLP space, doing research here, also in generative AI at UC Berkeley. And with that, I'll just hand it over to you to quickly introduce yourselves. Thanks.
Hey everyone, this is a mic check, actually.
think this is working. Great. Can everyone hear me? Oh, they're in the back near the pizza. Yes, great. Actually, the pizza is gone, of course. So really excited to be here. My name is Sandhya Hegde. I'm a venture capitalist at Unusual Ventures. I'm here with a couple of my teammates, Alisa, David, and Virginia. Please say hi to them. If any of you are thinking about starting a company, they are the best people to talk to. Go Harris, Alisa, and David immediately after this panel is done. So a little bit about Unusual Ventures first. We are $1 billion early stage fund. So we often invest in teams that are pretty much at day zero, just have a great idea, want to start prototyping and building something. And we exclusively focus on, really technical founders at the very, very early stages of building a company. We exclusively invest in software companies, and particularly David, Alisa, and I are focused on what we call AI native software. And by that, what we mean is software where the core value prop comes from either using a foundation model or building tools that help other people use foundation models. So this has been obviously a big focus for the tech industry, I would say for the last 2 years, and it has really captured the public imagination in the last few months. So super excited to be here. And a little bit more about myself. So I actually started my career as a student founder. So I'm really thrilled to talk to those of you who are considering doing the same. I was a student founder at IIT Bombay back in India in 2007, and then ended up joining the venture capital industry, spent some time at Stanford, worked at Sequoia Capital, at Khosla Ventures, then went back to industry, helped build a company called Amplitude in the analytics space, then went back to venture. So I've kind of bounced back and forth and done everything related to early stage venture, from founding, building, funding, all of it. Hope to give back to this community and answer questions you may have about everything spanning from how to think about your career in tech to how to start a company. Off to you, Gaspar.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me? All right. Okay, good. I'm Gaspar Begush. I'm on faculty at UC Berkeley. I teach at the College of Letters and Science and Linguistics department, and also I co-teach in computer science in EECS department, signal processing in humans and machines. I am the PI of the Berkeley Speech and Computation Lab, which is a lab that is focusing on NLP, language models, speech-based language models, but our primary focus is on interpretability of AI. And why we are interested in interpretability of AI, because the models that we are all here for today are extremely well at predicting data. So they're really mastering the prediction, but we don't understand how they're learning. And that's, in my opinion, is going to be the next frontier of both research and industry. And so if you think of interpretability, it's a complex topic. And most people focus on vision when they do interpretability work. And vision is great, but vision is extremely complex, right? We have hundreds of thousands of colors, and we have hundreds of thousands of shapes that these models need to learn. And when we move to language, we basically we shrink that space tremendously, right? Languages have only a couple of sounds that they combine, and that really helps us get into how these models are learning, what they're doing. And then the two basic things that we can learn with that is one, how models are learning, and then the second is how humans are learning. And we can learn from each other, right? It's really exciting, because by observing how babies are learning, right, a lot of these models in unsupervised learning are based on how kids learn their data. And so we can build better models if we understand the cognitive science and linguistics behind language and our cognition. And vice versa, right? We can build we can better understand how we as humans work and where we're different and where we're similar from AI. I'm really excited about this panel because I want to talk about the importance of research and also how to get from research and what's the real benefit of research and academic settings, and how to use that advantage in industry, especially in these days when we hear a lot about how industry is leading the way and how the models are becoming so big that academia is a little bit behind in competing. I think there's a lot that the two worldviews or backgrounds can contribute to each other.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much for your introduction. And having said that, we want to make this as interactive as possible. After our fireside chat here, we quickly want you to answer questions and the things that interest you. So if you scan the QR code here, you can actually submit your questions on Slido and then upvote the questions that you like the most.
Yeah, so I'm going to be keeping track of those. And so in addition, some of the questions with the most upvotes will be rewarded a t-shirt, which is so exciting. So definitely keep your questions coming. We'll try our best to get around to all of them, given our time constraints. But overall, let's go ahead and get started.
They're really good t-shirts, Efron.
And by the way, if you're still standing in the back, we have a couple of seats here in the front, so feel free to take a seat. All right, this is for later. Thanks again for Berkeley House Entrepreneurship Program for sponsoring this. This is super amazing. All right, I'm just going to keep the QR code up here so you can submit your questions. So to maybe start it off, thanks for the introduction. And I think something that's on everyone's mind right now is, of course, GPT-4, right? And we kind of wanted to make this as open as possible from your end. So I would just kind of like to learn, what do you think are the implication the release of GPT-4 has? Have you yourself been kind of, I'd say, underwhelmed because the expectations were so enormous in that sense? And how do you think it's going to continuously shape industries? What are we expecting?
Very, very short question, rather short answer. Yeah, no, I think this is pretty much like what is top of mind for, I'm not even exaggerating when I say the entire software industry right now. It's a little bigger than just GPT-4. I would say GPT-4 represents kind of the state-of-the-art model right now. And I would say GPT-3 was actually the big leap forward that no one saw coming and no one was quite expecting, and kind of took, I think, it would be fair to say, both research and industry by surprise in terms of what it could do. But the broader view is, if you want to call it foundation models, both language models, diffusion models that generate pixels instead of words. I think about it as, we're all looking for the right analogy, but I think there are a couple analogies that have quickly become my favorite ones in terms of like how it will impact the world. So the first one is, if you think about like the mechanization of farming, right? We used to live in a world where there were a lot of people who farmed and it was a very artisanal craft. And then mechanization happened. It was less than 100 years ago that true mechanization happened. And now we live in a world where actually farm production is orders of magnitude higher than it used to be. We do more farming, food is cheaper to produce, and more people have access to food. So in a sense, we expanded agriculture as an industry by mechanizing it. At the same time, there are fewer farmers, right? There are fewer human beings working as farmers. So I think that is a very good analogy for a lot of how human beings will be affected. And I realize it's a very ancient analogy. So a more recent one, which you might still consider it ancient, is if you think about like photography, right? Digital photography. Before digital photography, you had people like using film and like taking their Kodak film to like what I'm told was called a photomat, which doesn't exist anymore, to like get the real developed developed into photographs, and there were fewer people who used to do that, right? So digital photography, first just digital cameras from companies like Sony, and now, just phone cameras have made everybody capable of being a photographer. And I think that is what we believe the foundation models will do, right? It will allow everybody to have access to skill sets that seemed very difficult to achieve before. And it will also change the nature of the industry. The photomats don't exist anymore, right? That has been replaced by applications that allow you to edit photographs as opposed to like going to a physical location with your film. So I think that those are kind of analogies that work really well with what we expect to see as foundation models get better and better. The big surprise is that everyone was expecting this to first happen for blue-collar work, right? Like, oh, the self-driving trucks will put all the truck drivers out of work. That was kind of the working hypothesis. If you ask someone like me in venture capital 5 years ago, that was our working hypothesis on like how labor and how industry will get disrupted, as opposed to no, if you are a lawyer or even like just a mediocre developer, your job is at risk, right? Or you are a SEO content writer, or you're a graphic designer. That I think is what the big surprise has been with GPT-3 and Stable Diffusion models showing us that actually it's going to be creative work that is going to see the next disruption, and how that will reshape industry, I think, is very similar to kind of previous modes of disruption that have happened in artisanal crafts like farming or photography.
Yeah, so I agree that I think we are developing technologies that will impact every aspect of the society in one way or another. So I think in that respect, I think we all need to be prepared. I think I would focus on three things maybe that make these models so successful, and kind of think about them is important as we talk about the foundation model. One is unsupervised aspect, right? These models learn in an unsupervised way. There's no labeled data, no feature engineering, no pictures with labels or speech transcribed with text. You just throw them tons of data and they learn. Okay. Second part is that is super important is generative aspect, right? These models, we went from our classifiers onto generative models, and this is they're so much powerful, right? The fact that models are not just classifying, not just labeling, not just doing some labeling work, but they're actually generating new unseen data, right? I mean, they're able to extrapolate. They're able to be very creative. I've worked with GANs a lot. GANs are amazing. They're a little out of fashion these days, but because they're difficult to train. But the amount of creativity in this model is really fascinating. And then, so you can interact with them, and it's not just a text model. You can chat with it now, and have that interactional experience. So I think that is super important, and that we moved away from just classifying onto really producing so-called generative AI, where these models are generating new data. They're producing new thoughts or new poems or creating new pictures, right? And that is the real power, because they're trained on human data, but they're able to do stuff that is, maybe beyond humans occasionally, or they're able to do stuff that we wouldn't be able to do. Now, the last thing is multimodality. That is not as much the case right now, right? GPT-4 is still, relatively, at least the version that we have, is still relatively, just text. Stable diffusion, you have text and pictures, but once we're able to put all these four, however many, right? So text, speech, vision, and maybe some sort of 3D interactional agents together, that's where I see another huge potential, because we know the models are learning better if they're trained on multimodal data. We know that they can create, or at least we think that they can create this kind of reasoning steps within them. And learning on one modality can transfer to another modality. So I think we mastered the first two, unsupervised and generative part, and now one big leap I think that will happen is probably multimodality. I think that the reason why I'm talking about these three things is because there's a big question out there. Are we hitting the ceiling? Is GPT-4 or Stable Diffusion, is that the most we'll get to, and it'll even out as we move forward, or is this just an exponential growth that we're seeing that will continue, right? Because in my experience, from ChatGPT, which was GPT 3.5, to GPT-4, there was an exponential growth. I mean, it's ridiculous. I'm not as impressed by GPT-4's performance. I'm more impressed by the fact from GPT 3.5 to 4, there's a huge improvement. Like, stuff that GPT 3.5 couldn't do, reason, metacognition, reason about reasoning, doing theoretical work, to stuff that basically you can test the models now on everything. And so the question is, will we continue to see this exponential growth, or is this it? And I see that multimodality, which GPT-4, by the way, is trained on multimodal data. We just don't have access to all the modality. So maybe that leap, that huge leap in performance, is partly due to a multimodal learning setting.
Yeah, I think I would definitely underline that, which is, when large language models first came out, this was 2018, correct me if I'm wrong, somebody. A lot of folks were like oh great, neural nets are getting better, deep learning is getting better, and instead of just like one narrow task like playing chess, it can do more, and language is a big part of what makes us human, so great. But we still thought about it as a very, very clever autocomplete, right? Because essentially they are prediction engines. So like, yeah, sure, if I give you 5 words, you predict the 6th word, you're generating this text one word at a time, not feeling threatened, right? However, what we've discovered is if you give it enough volume of data and you train it well in terms of like the reinforcement learning you're doing, the reward system, suddenly with GPT-4, which honestly I'm not underwhelmed by, it just continues to boggle my mind, it feels like this is not just predicting text, it's able to reason, as Professor Gasper said, and I think that is incredibly impressive. I think what is probably going to happen is that we haven't fully explored the capabilities and functionality of the state-of-the-art model yet, and in the coming months we will probably realize it's even more capable and powerful, as long as you are comfortable with a lot of error modes and a lot of hallucination. It will still surprise you on the upside and can do a lot more than we realized it can. Now, however, we are seeing pretty much like a kind of a natural language layer being introduced to every software company in the world. Not all of them need something as powerful as GPT-4. If all you want to do is do text to SQL or do summarization, you don't need something with all the latency and cost that a big multimodal language model comes with. You don't need that. So hopefully what we'll see is that the conversation will shift from just the state-of-the-art GPT-4 to what are function-specific models that we will see spread out in the world and become very common. And that's where also the opportunity for entrepreneurship and technical founders like the ones on this campus will come from.
Yeah, thank you. I think that those were very insightful answers. And both of you spoke a bit about growth and technology development. And to sort of delve a bit deeper into that, do you think that most of the growth in tech development will come from ecosystems that already have a large amount of capture? For example, like Microsoft Office, Notion, ecosystems that have a lot of users? Or would you say that you think that newer companies and newer ecosystems will have the chance to sort of break through this mold that larger companies have created and create breakthrough innovations with foundational models?
So I'm very much in the latter camp, which is that there is a ton of opportunity for everybody, right? So because if you think about kind of the strengths and weaknesses here, the companies that already have a big customer base have some strengths, which is they have more data that they have a go-to-market strategy, they already have distribution, so that feels very compelling. They have more resources, great, right? All that is very compelling. But in the whole history of technology innovation, what we have seen time after time is that for these companies, there's a big disincentive to innovate, which is that they have to disrupt themselves, right? Google is pretty much the perfect example of this. The first big breakthrough in transformer models came from Google, but they could not, shift from their existing Google search business to just a question-answer business like ChatGPT without killing their amazing advertising company, right? So they have a huge disincentive to slow things down and not innovate fast. And that's going to be true for every large incumbent company that has something to protect and something that will die, right? There's a lot of internal politics. There's a reason why Microsoft gave billions of dollars to OpenAI instead of I promise you, more than a dozen teams internally that they had working on machine learning, working on, they acquired companies, that started in Berkeley that focused on natural language. But despite all of that, because the incumbents have a lot of politics, disincentives to, kill or, kind of ship products that kill other existing businesses in the company, they're not able to take advantage of the strengths they have. It's very hard. They're all trying because, they've all seen this script play out, right? They have seen the classic disruption cycle. They know that if they don't disrupt themselves, someone else will, but it's still hard. So now the question is, what is the advantage a founder has? You're young, you're not experienced, you have no customers, you have no data, you can get some funding, but that's it. So what are your advantages? And I'd say the advantages you have is the capacity to take risk. You have nothing to lose, which sounds simple, but it's a huge advantage because you can take risk, move fast. And the other advantage you have is focus. When a big company ships a product, they have to ship a product that will be suitable for a lot of different customer segments, because they don't have the luxury of saying this is only for this type of customer, everyone else ignore it for now. Right? No one will ignore it. The media will use it, journalists will complain about Google Bard, their stock market value will go down. They cannot control the chaos, right? So they have to be careful. Whereas a startup can just pick one very niche customer to focus on and create a mind-blowing product for them. The expectations the customer has from a startup is different. So those are the advantages. So I think within each industry, the actual outcome of who captures value, is it the startup, is it the incumbent, will come down to the culture of innovation that the incumbent has. And in industries where there isn't a good culture of innovation for the leading incumbent, VCs like me are betting money on startups to disrupt them. In companies where we see there is a strong culture, they are moving fast, we are also being more careful because we know that their natural advantages are something to really give us pause. And then, of course, there is the whole, picks and shovels in the gold rush analogy. There'll be a lot of infrastructure startups that will develop tools for all the developers that need to use these, whether they are in startups or incumbents. The picks and shovels don't care. As long as you are trying to build a gold mine, they will supply you. And that's another place that I think a lot of technical founders, should definitely focus on in terms of opportunity.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think, you know, a couple of frontiers that are happening in large language models is to make them smaller but with equal performance, right? And we know that the first processors were as big as this room probably, if not bigger, and now, you know, they're extremely, extremely small. And so the question is, can we do something like that? And that could use a lot. That could see a lot of uses, right? If you have a similar or the same performance or like more niche performance on a model that is, you know, 1,000 times smaller than some of these large language models, that's going to be huge. And you can think of all the possible applications of that. I think what is important essentially is that you know, we continue this. I think I mean, the question is valid in that we need to continue providing students and the entire, you know, infrastructure, the entire infrastructure to do great startups, right? You know, data availability. The universities need to continue teaching students the, you know, top technology. So I think that that ecosystem needs to be there, and I think we need to think about it a little bit more than in the past, given that you know, given some of the recent developments. But I think in general, I totally agree. As long as we continue, you know, having a bunch of open source stuff, data availability, and just continue the ecosystem, I think that there's going to be a lot of potential for smaller players, as has been the case in the past.
Right. I'm curious if I'm allowed to ask a question, actually. Like, how do you see the resources needed by research to keep up with industry, given that, you know, like, industry has so much more capital,
Right.
not everybody is doing open source work. Like, how do you see the partnership, given that, like, it is a resource intensive field of study?
That is a really good question. Yeah. So I think one pleasant, I guess, the recent development is that we industry researchers do get access to these models, right? So we get APIs. Sometimes we get them even faster than other people do. So that's really important, right? Because we are never going to be able to, you know, even train such a model. You need thousands and thousands of GPUs. But you know, research can move forward if we have access to these models. Again, we'll never be able to collect data. There's a lot of proprietary data, all sorts of stuff, but like having access to the build models is going to be crucial. Having, you know, the ability to do interpretability work, explainable AI kind of work, that is important. And I think industry is attentive to that. I think they are giving the research the access. There's a lot of also, you know, interactions and conversations between industry and research that needs to happen. I think that's a really positive development. But yeah, in terms of computing resources, I think it's even more important to get access to these. But companies are also really great at giving us computing resources that are necessary for research, because almost every successful industry application starts in some lab, right? And then there are people who take that idea, to take that new technology and bring it to perfection. And that, I think, is the model that will work in the future as well. Because what's our advantage as you were saying, what's your advantage as founder? As my advantage as a faculty is that I can basically look into something that is completely unapplied today, right? So I can start asking a question that will never make money, right? And I can take even more risk than the founder can take, right? And so that's how, you know, this very basic research happens. And most of the AI development up until very recently was still done in the academic labs, and probably the basic research will still be originating there.
So many important things you talked about, like from kind of the perspective you took as a founder, as a student founder. I think many people kind of try to think about the only opportunity as building a new GPT wrapper. And there's nothing wrong with GPT wrappers necessarily, but there is so much more when it comes to infrastructure. Look at companies like LangChain, Scale AI, who kind of help out in the broader environment. And I think what we also now talked about, you know, the role that research plays, that academics play. And I think I've been like chatting with some of the people here in the audience before, and I think some question that was arising is, to what extent can we actually now at this point of time distinguish the various levels of safety? I think it's a great point of time to talk a bit about safety, right? GPT-4 has allegedly been completed, I think in August already, and now for the past 8 months been made as safe as possible. But then there are companies like Anthropic who are like advertising an even safer model. So Professor, I'd be very curious to learn more about that. How does it work?
Yeah, that's a really, really good and important question, and it has so many answers that I don't even know where to start. There's so many risks involved, right, as with any new technology, but maybe even more in this case, because, right, so one risk is that these large foundation models are becoming so good at coding and finding analytic solutions to things. Now, back in the day, right, you always had bad players. Bad players were there, ever since the humanity started. But for every bad players, you had a bunch of good players with roughly equal abilities, right? Now the question is that balance still there, right? Will we create a model that will be more capable than us, and then where can that lead, right? If it's paired with internet, it can find APIs, it can find all sorts of holes in the code that we would not even think of, right? So there's definitely one danger. I'm sure that the companies are doing a lot of thinking about that, because we have technology for the first time where it's not some algorithm that you engineer. It's like a huge model where we do not know what's happening inside, and that is scary, right? And we have to think about it, and that's why I am a big proponent of interpretable AI, right? So try to understand how these models are learning so that we can control them better. But that is a real risk, and we have to, as a society, and when I talk about it, this is not just a technical question. It's not just a question for founders or for industry or for academia. It's a political question, right? And that we as a society and regulators will need to answer. There's biases, right? The data that these networks are trained on are biased. We know that, and the companies are doing a lot to limit those biases. But you're never fully able to do that. So there are many things. Another thing is it comes back to interpretability. We don't know why they're making some decision, right? And so you cannot use them in all sorts of applications, right? Because it would be too dangerous, or too, we cannot have a model that is biased and not understand those biases. For example, you cannot ask him who to give a loan or not. But you can imagine, right? You can imagine GPT evaluating homeworks. There was, I think, even talk at this university that maybe grading in the future will be automated. I think this is inevitable, but we have to be really careful, right? So that the network doesn't, the model doesn't penalize some social groups that are, or stuff like that. So this is just like two things that come out of my mind very immediately. Yeah. So one is more like this societal bias danger. The other is, the danger of us not being able to control these models. Like, are we one bad prompt away from, global catastrophe? Probably not, but I think it's good to be thinking about it precisely because maybe for the first time now we have an agent that is performing, so close in some tasks to humans, and in some tasks even better than humans, which we do not understand, which we haven't engineered. We just created it and trained it, right? And so I think it's important to have this in mind, and everyone who will be involved with this, to think about this. So those are roughly two areas where there's also research work and also people are talking about. But yeah, the safety is definitely an issue, and also an opportunity for companies to work on that.
Yeah, I'm definitely a pessimist when it comes to human society. so,
What does that mean?
I believe that like if you can repurpose a model to do something harmful, illegal, that will make somebody wealthy, it will happen. It won't be Terminator, Skynet, like global catastrophe. It will be like small changes that make life more annoying or dangerous for specific pools of people, usually the most vulnerable. Like that has pretty much been the arc of human civilization. Every time we create some new technology, some bad actors will figure out how to use it for personal gain and take advantage of the vulnerable. And I think the more powerful the technology itself is, the more likely it is that that is going to be the outcome, and we have to kind of fight hard to prepare for that eventuality. That's kind of how I think about it. And yeah, there are so many levels here, right? From bias being propagated at scale without kind of the ability to really kind of understand, defend, and change. But there's also like really, I would say, patterns that have happened before, like fraud, right? There's just so much potential for financial fraud using human-like agents, because people have done that in the past. And anytime you have algorithmic propagation of content, you have disinformation, propaganda. I mean, we've done a lot of damage to our civilization even without generative AI already. So you can imagine what is possible with generative AI. That we'll have to live in a world where it's very easy for knowledge to be faked and look accurate but not be accurate. Like that is the future we have to prepare for, right? So I think and we're not even talking about like stuff like the AI, AGI, and software kind of making itself smarter. Like I think we are going to have real problems way before we reach that horizon event.
I'm glad you mentioned this is misinformation, because that's one thing that slipped my mind. Yes, for sure, misinformation. Another thing that is like being mentioned on Twitter these days is also the ability. So we project our humanity onto these models, right? When you chat with a large language model, there is some part in us that wants the agent on the other side be human-like, right? And there's a danger that these models can also influence us, right? As humans, or use humans as their agents in some sort of a worst case scenario setting. But yeah, so. If you think of, for speech, right? I do a lot of work on speech. You can train a network, a model that'll talk in the voice of your grandma very fast, and you can call somebody in that voice, and the potential for fraud there is insane. And we are working on, that's where research comes in, right? So the first step is research, and then hopefully that will turn an industry. But one thing you can think about is, how can we do the captcha test, right? So for somebody like some voice actor, right? How do I verify that you're actually my grandmother, not somebody's model? And up until now, we have been able to come up with pretty good safety mechanisms, and I hope that will still be the case. But I think we are faced with much more powerful models than we've had in the past.
Yeah, and both of you talked a lot about how students have certain capabilities that some in industry do not. And I'm sure that this is a question that many in the audience are wondering now. What can they do to position themselves better as entrepreneurs, as researchers, as innovators and leaders of the future?
I mean, I can take the industry side of this question. I think the two of us were talking about this before, right? Like if you want to make sure you can innovate, which I think for folks like you in this room, I think that's almost like a core value, right? You want to be able to push push forward the frontier of whatever it is that, or whatever work you're doing, it's really important to understand the foundation to be able to do that, right? Like, even let's go back to my 100-year-old farming analogy. Like, you could not build a great tractor if you did not understand how farming works, right? So even to be able to innovate and push something forward, you need a strong foundation, and you need multidisciplinary exposure to be able to kind of take ideas from different worlds and use them to come up with something that never existed before. So I think for industry, it's very much, know your foundations, like follow your curiosity. Even at my age, like, I try to have a learner's mindset because that's going to pretty much be the only thing that keeps anybody here relevant in a future that's changing so fast. And two, if you're thinking about a business or thinking about how to convert a technical idea into a product or a company, you have to know your customer, right? There is no replacement for having customer empathy. You cannot build a great product without customer empathy. So either you're building something that you would already want to use, or you spend time in your customer's shoes and kind of almost put on that persona and walk a mile in their shoes, basically, to like understand what it feels like and what are the problems that you want to solve. I think there's so many people who start companies for the sake of starting a company. They don't really have empathy with any particular customer or pain, and it's just, you can go through the motions and keep yourself busy but never really get anywhere. So pick something that you actually care about, right? Like, you need to care about it for 10 years, not 10 days. And that, there are very few things, for most human beings, there are very few things that meet that high criteria of like, yeah, I'm going to always care about this problem. It's not just something that sounds cool in the moment.
And then start with the problem and not with the AI solution, right?
Yes.
Because it's very easy to kind of go down the rabbit hole. Oh, I have this new model. What kind of problem can I find to solve it? No, you should start with the problem. And if coincidentally AI works to solve that, even better.
Yeah, I think there's some value in just playing around with what new tools exist, because you want to understand how they work and what their capabilities are. But that is not a startup.
Yeah.
That is you learning. And I think distinguishing between the two, very important.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, there's been a lot of amazing questions being asked by our audience today, but unfortunately, I think time constraints won't allow us to ask every single one. That being said, one of the top voted questions for right now kind of goes to back what you guys were just talking about. Do you guys personally think that it's viable to build an AI startup exclusively on OpenAI's API?
I mean, short answer would be yes. But I would say, think carefully about the word exclusively, right? So there's a lot that goes into building a software company. If one of the many, like, you will be using, AWS's cloud infrastructure, there's a lot of existing software APIs you'll be using. And it's what's important is there a competitive advantage for you to build, as opposed to, are you using OpenAI's API, right? So if nowhere in your ideation is there any place you can point to and say, I can build competitive advantages here. This is really hard to do. I can do it well. Other people can't just copy me in 3 days. If nowhere in your product ideation does that exist, then yeah, you're just a wrapper around someone else's API. But leveraging APIs that exist out there, don't invalidate your ability to start a company. It's a huge point of leverage, right? Like, someone has spent billions of dollars building this powerful piece of tech. Maybe it can accelerate your product development process by years, which is great. So I wouldn't think of it as, oh, if I use this, my startup isn't real. The question is more, what goes on top of it? What problems are you uniquely solving that OpenAI is not?
Yeah, and if I go back to the previous question, kind of answering this a little bit. I'm in academia, so I'm in at the university, and so I think your real advantage is that you have perspectives that others don't, and if you come into if you're thinking about some really good API. There's probably going to be a lot of people that are going to be doing that the question asks, right? So what is your competitive advantage? And how to get that while you're still in school? So one thing is, on the technical side, I think it's so important not to forget about analytical tools and analytical approaches of the past. Like, it's very easy to jump into machine learning and learn all about it, or learn how to use it, but understanding these models and understanding alternative approaches is the thing that can make you competitive, right? It's important not to throw away all the developments and mathematics, statistics, non-neural machine learning that are out there that really have the potential to give you the advantage when you're facing a problem, right? Because not everything is solvable by a huge neural network, right? There are things where you need other tools. So important to keep in mind. Another thing is a lot of the quantitative part of work in startups is being automated, right? If anything, I would use OpenAI's API in my startup to outsource coding, right? Take classes in non-X disciplines, right? So you can learn about world that is not just technical STEM world. I think humanities, I think social sciences. I mean, I'm a little biased because I do teach at the College of Letters and Science, but those will be things that might not be as easily replaceable by API. By ChatGPT or large language models. And so the breadth and just unique perspectives that you get from taking classes that other people, other founders, your competitors will not have taken, that can give you new perspectives, new insights, completely new background where you can be again competitive, right? So I think it's important not to just jump and place all your bets on deep neural nets and machine learning classes, but the great thing about the university is that you can learn so many subjects, and that can really give you an advantage at the edge, having that unique perspective. I myself, I didn't come necessarily from a very technical background, but the new insights and new perspectives that I got in less STEM fields were so crucial in my career. And it's sometimes easier to learn to code, or now it's going to be easier to outsource coding. But the deep understanding of models, the deep understanding of analytical approaches that we have been developing for hundreds of years, humanity, and also that social/humanities perspective, right? Because what you're doing is you have a customer. Customers are humans, right? And studying how humans behave, how they interact with other humans, and what defines a human is, I think, going to be more and more and more important.
Yeah, I think maybe like a real example. How many folks here have used Lensa? Okay, I thought that would be more. That's fine, that's good. That means
this app had like 100 million downloads or more, like within a couple of weeks. The one that would like turn your face into like an avatar. Lensa was like, I think, end of last year. Kind of a past trend already, but it was crazy.
Yeah, so here's kind of an example, right? And what I want you to take away is that entrepreneurship has many shapes, right? It's not just all like, oh, if you haven't raised $5 million from unusual ventures, you're not an entrepreneur. I wish, but it has many shapes, right? So this app called Lensa, built by an extremely tiny team. It might have just been one person, to be honest. Might have been maybe two, right? All it did was remove the friction of of like someone who needs to learn how to write prompts for Midjourney or DALL-E or one of these diffusion models that like create images. All it did was remove the friction of someone having to learn that. Let's say it takes 30 minutes to join Midjourney's Discord channel and for free learn how to like give it your own photographs to create an AI generated avatar, right? 30 minutes is being generous. It probably takes more like 10 minutes, but you can do it for free. Instead, hundreds of millions of people chose to pay Lensa like, I don't know, $3 or $5, not have to learn what a prompt is, right? Be able to just do it on their phone where they upload like 20 pictures onto Lensa and Lensa spits back like 100 weird images for $3. So this company in the span of, I mean, calling it a company, it's like literally a handful of people. They made, something like $300-400 million in the span of a few weeks. That everyone on Instagram wanted a Lensa avatar for, right? That is the type of entrepreneurship. Trust me, like most startups do not make that much money. So it's, you want to think about like a problem you can solve. And I'm almost like going against what I'm preaching earlier here, because this was a wrapper. This was like, by every definition of the word, this was just a wrapper on someone else's foundation model. And yet they were able to create a lot of value for a few weeks. I don't know if they're still trending now, probably not anymore. So entrepreneurship has many shapes. So I think, this is a great example of someone who really understands human psychology saying, yes, Midjourney does this for free, but if I take away the friction of figuring out how to prompt Midjourney, a lot of people will pay me $5 for this, right? And because of all the amazing software development abstractions available to us today, it doesn't take a lot of people to build something like this and ship it as a mobile app. You can do it as, one or two people. And that is just mind-boggling, right? Like that was impossible to do a few years ago and is now possible. And who knows, maybe this will change the shape of entrepreneurship itself and like how capital and talent comes together to generate companies.
Thank you for that. My next question, we touched about this within our conversation earlier, but in terms of biases within these models, I know you said we can't completely get rid of them, but I wanted to learn from you guys, what do you think, what steps need to be taken in order to mitigate the impact it has on models that are used by the next generation?
So that's a really tough question, because if you knew that, then the thing will be solved, and we're not quite there yet. So one of the things that we probably observe, all of you have observed that have interacted with these models, is that they're very, very polite, right? Whenever you get into any kind of sphere where they would say something inappropriate, they it immediately give you the generic answer, right? And that is great. But I think they're like the guardrails are set at extremely high levels, and that kind of makes them less applicable, less applied, right? So because if we think of GPT-3, 4 as an agent you want to interact with all the time, we love interacting with humans, right? And if you just have this generic machine that always gives you the most polite answer, or like if you even ask it a question, or like actually sometimes I use it to correct my language, my style of writing, because I'm not a first language speaker. And it always say, oh, this is great, you're so clear and nice, but here are some suggestions, right? It has this very, very polite.
The Dutch people don't give feedback that way.
Exactly. So we love hang out with humans that are sometimes, bold and, just human-like, right? Now, I mean, obviously, mitigating the biases is extremely important. And my guess is that well, I have to be careful here because let's say legal profession, right? Let's open that can of worms. GPT-4 is in the 19th percentile of the bar exam. It finds, it reads contracts and finds loopholes better than many lawyers. And that is some really, really slippery slope. I am of an opinion that in legal proceedings we cannot possibly use these models yet, not until we understand them better, right? Because legal system has such profound consequences on humans. So my sense is that until we solve this problem of biases or alignment, that we will use those models in aspects that are lower stake, and maybe refrain from using them in legal settings. I mean, it'll be used in legal settings for reading contracts, but not for deciding. We will not replace judges with GPT-4, right, or 5. At least that is my hope. I mean, at least that is something that society should be thinking about, right?
Given the Supreme Court, who knows?
Right.
Maybe it will be
there are
better.
a couple of cases. There are a couple of cases right now. But anyway, so I think there are use cases where the potential for bias to result in something really bad is relatively small, and there are use cases where we should be really extremely careful. All right, and legal sphere is one of them. Yeah. Maybe a middle ground is something like GPT-4 grading our essays in academic settings, right? So there will be biases there, but maybe you could have some sort of appeal process or stuff like that. But there is talk of taking some loads of graduate students by automating grading, and there's I think there are use cases of these models that we don't even think of yet, and I think the guiding principle.
Would you have your exams graded by AI?
Sorry?
Would you have your exams graded by AI?
Actually, I use GPT-4 a lot in my class. It's great to teach with it. It's performing really well on some aspect of, say, language science, linguistics. On aspects that I work on, it's performing really poorly. So, but I think that in education, I cannot see a future without large language models, actually. Also these models will be able to pick on exactly where your knowledge is failing, right? Where is your hole in the knowledge? And they're great at summarizing, they're great at explaining. That's very easy. Summarization and explaining is very easy for them. So this kind of a personalized approach to education, grading, and then we'll have to rethink assignments, right? How do we do assignments where you don't just use GPT-4? But again, as I mentioned, these models are performing really well on some fields, maybe more technical fields, but in English exam or in the exams where you have to be humanly creative, they're performing not as well, right? So English language test was the lowest in the score in which it's scored, right? So I think that education in the next few years will be radically influenced by large language models, and hopefully for the best.
I think since we want to get as many questions as possible, let's ask some more from the audience and then get some concise answers for you to make sure everyone's voice is heard. How does it sound?
Cool. So for Sonia, this one's specifically for you. Obviously, you see a lot of people who come up to you with ideas or just pitches in general. How do you exactly filter between people just capitalizing on hype versus them actually building a sustainable business?
That's I think the right kind of the short answer is we have always looked for authenticity, right? So probably starting, I want to call it like, say, 2010, it kind of became, there was this shift in like what was considered the thing bright young people of your age do. There was this shift from like, oh no, it's no longer investment banking, it's no longer consulting. The new hot thing for smart people to do, if they are not going to just like go be an engineer, is to become a startup founder, right? So I think we've spent the last 10 years seeing a lot of extremely bright people, even without the AI hype, want to be startup founders because they think that is a cool thing to do, as opposed to because they are passionate about some particular problem that they want to build a company around. And it plays out in a couple different ways. Often, we will kind of dig into like, okay, what is your understanding of the problem? And if we feel like it's not sufficient, the way we give people feedback is that, you're very bright, but it doesn't feel like this is an authentic idea to you, right? You don't have enough authenticity. You can respond to that in two ways. You can work on a different idea that you think is more authentic to you, or you can go develop authenticity, which is actually my favorite advice to give very young people, is like, go find a way to become authentic in this problem. Either,
like,
live in the shoes of your customer, do your customer's job for a while, go join another startup where you will get more exposure to this problem, work there for 12 months, learn how hard it is to grow a startup and all the problems around, around building one. So I think that is kind of what we look for, is we look for authenticity, and we look for passion around the problem area. And if we don't find that, if the team is very bright, we give them advice to like go, develop some authenticity.
Awesome. What are your guys' expectations for GPT-5?
That's really hard to say. As I mentioned, I think the big question is going to be, are we seeing the same kind of improvement from, say, as we did from 3.5 to 4 and then to 5, or is the improvement going to be, leveling as we move forward? And that's going to be really exciting to see. I mean, as I mentioned, I was impressed by improvement from 3.5 to 4. Let's see if the 5th raises to that expectation. I think, as I mentioned, multimodality is going to be the next frontier, right? So, give me a video, create a video of X and Y. And then there are so many aspects of multimodality that we don't even think of now, right? So that's the first thing I would be looking into. But yeah, hard to predict the future.
Yeah, so you spoke about the rate of change of the growth of the industry. Where do you think the capacity constraints for that lie? Is it the hardware? Is it the data?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And people are, they disagree on that. But there are people who think that language models are, will never be able to reason. They think they don't reason now and they will never be able to. And that's a really, really profound question that I don't have an answer to, is the following. Is this architecture of transformers enough for the growth to continue exponentially?
Yeah. Will AGI have a transformer architecture?
My best bet would be not. Because if you think of it, knowledge is non-linear, right? And language is a linear sequence of words. And so if we are able to build models that are, able to capture that non-linearity, or like say, if we're recording this, if you're listening to what we said, and you wanted to make a presentation of what was said today, probably, you could do two things. You could write everything we said, or you could write a summary of what we said, or you could write a graph, right, with like, this aspect or that aspect, and make connections between those things, right? So language is in a sense a linearization of a complex knowledge, right? Knowledge, if you think of knowledge as something that you would put on your paper as a summary of what was said today, and if that was a graph, right, you would have a bunch of concepts and interactions between them. And when if you had to say out loud what was said today, you would have to linearize that in a sequence of words. Okay, so large language models are really great at that linearization and capturing the sequence of words. But as we've seen, they have problems with factual knowledge. Now, the impressive thing is that GPT-4 is way better at not hallucinating things, right? It's actually producing knowledge. It's also memorizing much more, right? So it's so much bigger that it's memorizing much more. But probably we need a relaxed architecture in terms that it's not just a sequence of words, but maybe some sort of a graph that is able to capture that. Now, it's possible that the rapid growth would continue even with like just transformers and increased parameters. But I think trying out different architectures, and then also multimodality, right? Because if you think of how kids learn when they're born, right? They don't only get text, they don't only get speech, they also get vision, they get 3D vision, they interact with the world, they smell the world, and they have social interaction, right? So once we're able to incorporate all of that, I think that we're going to get better and better. But the crucial thing is that these are essentially all neural approaches, right? This is all neural architectures, and so the basic principle is there. I think we'll just need to improve on architectures, and other people share that opinion.
Yeah, I think there'll be a lot of local optimization around where we are right now that is not about more data. It's more about like optimizing this architecture. For example, there's something called retrieval augmented generation where you can separate memory from the generative capability and the language capability, and that hallucinates less. So I think there'll be like a lot of local optimization from this point, which will still feel huge because we are only beginning to explore the use cases and the way this can be made into product. So I think the next couple of years is going to be really amazing in terms of what products come out of this tech, but there will be another big step change needed for anything approaching true AGI. I think the current architecture has serious limitations. So yeah, I will upvote multimodality specifically for the GPT-5 prediction.
Yeah, thanks so much for that answer. Fantastic. I think before we have time for one more question, quick hands up. Who of you pays $20 a month for ChatGPT Plus? Okay, that's quite a start. I think more than YouTube Premium probably. This one, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, how do you foresee copyright and data privacy concerns, and how will it specifically impact the growth of the generative AI space?
Can I just answer real quick? I'm partial because I work a lot with the GANs architecture, so generative adversarial nets, and we've seen that they came out of popularity a little bit because they're difficult to train. But diffusion models are much easier to train, but they memorize more, right? And that is a big problem because if your generative AI spills out exactly the picture that is copyrighted, then you have a legal problem. And I think the legal profession is already working on that to some degree, but some architectures don't necessarily have that problem. So we'll be able probably to build models that will not memorize, or at least will not generate the exact memorized aspect. Now, I mean, a lot of people already have problems with using copyrighted training data to begin with. And again, that's more of a societal, and legal question than a question for people in tech or in industry or in research. But if your GPT-4 answers questions that up until now bloggers were answering with a better summary based on their content, right? Then it's basically taking a lot of, building off of their content and giving you a product that is, somewhat problematic. And I think the legal profession will need to think about that. Also, it's probably the case that, if I had a problem, like if I had a quick question, how to build, I don't know, garden in my backyard, right? Up until now, I would go to some blogger site probably, which would be directed to me by Google, right? And I check their site, and that blogger would make some money from advertising. Now, I'm probably just gonna, ask GPT or some other language model, how do I do that? And that, a lot of that space will see, probably shrinkage of their market. But there is copyright issues, intellectual property of training data, as well as the generated data is a big question and a thorny one. And I think we're just going to have to make sure that, if you're okay, but regardless of what happened with the training data, when you cannot generate copyrighted images or like almost exactly, replicas of copyrighted images. So we'll have to find a way to make these models generate stuff that is not exact replicates.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think what will happen is capitalism will kind of steamroll copyright issues as it has done in the past. Like the music industry is a great example of this already. But my hope is that someone will figure out the lineage problem and come up with a way to compensate people whose data most contributed to the knowledge and the memory. Like that would be my hope. But as I have warned you before, I'm a pessimist.
Well, there is a chance that these models become an institution, right? Like big banks. It's possible that large language models become so powerful and so important to the society that we will, take a blind eye on many things that we shouldn't, just in order to have them and keep keep developing them. And that has happened in the past, and that probably will, that's possible that it happens now. Because if you ask most of the people, what is more important, that we have AGI or that we have all the copyright? So I think a lot of people will just, they don't care as much as intellectual property as they care about having things automated by these models. So that is definitely a danger for intellectual property in the future.
Yeah, I'd say we stay with a more hopeful future, not become too pessimistic early. Having said that, let's give it up one more time for Sanya and Gasper here on stage. Thank you so much for being with us today. Everyone who has answered questions can, of course, get some swag down here, and we have enough for all of you, hopefully, that are interested. And then we now have all the rest of the time reserved for you to come here, ask questions about AI, pitch your startup, and get in touch with our fantastic speakers and unusual ventures.
Yeah, you can DM me on Twitter while it still works. At Sandhya.
Yeah, and if you want to check out our socials to get updates from events, quick QR code to scan. And yeah, thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good job. Good job.
This was great. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Hi. Nice to meet you too.
Question about the filters that you're putting companies on the scout for the state.